Welcome to our podcast. I'm Andy Murray, the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association, and today I'm handing over the mic to a guest chair, Al Simmonite, Managing Director of Advance Consulting. Before you listen to this podcast, please be aware that we trialled new podcast software for this episode and had some issues with the sound quality. We feel the energy of this recording could be lost if we re-recorded, so we decided to adjust the sound as best as we can. A transcript is available on the MPA website if there's any element that you struggle to hear. Enjoy the episode. We'd welcome your comments and feedback on the topic and the discussions between our guests.
Hello and welcome to this month's Major Projects Association podcast. This month we're talking about the topic of neurodiversity, and aside from the change or the usual introduction from Andy, you've got the pleasure of my company today, Al Simmonite, Managing Director of the Advance Consultancy, and I'm here to facilitate the conversation with our three guests who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a minute. But neurodiversity is one of those topics of conversation that's become very much to the fore in recent years. It's become much more prevalent in our day-to-day conversations in major projects. So we thought this was a perfect opportunity to really explore that in more detail with a number of different individuals with different perspectives, including myself, who come at this very much from the perspective of being an ally to the diversity and inclusion conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce our three guests and then ask them to give a brief introduction of their backgrounds and experiences. And I'm going to start with Helen Buckingham from WSP. Helen, can you just give us a brief introduction, please?
Certainly. I'm a technical director in the pharmaceutical arena. I have been working in the engineering environment since I was through university. I did chemical engineering with biotechnology and then latterly went into project delivery.
Thank you. And next we have the pleasure of Ant Newman, who is Chief Technical Officer or Chief Data Officer at Projecting Success. Ant, so you give us a brief introduction, please.
Sure. So I'm very new to project delivery, but I've been working obviously in projects, in data teams for a long time. For the purposes of this podcast, most relevant is that I was diagnosed autistic when I was a child. I was non-verbal till I was about 14 and barely verbal till I was about 24. And so probably my experiences of working in engineering, mathematics and project delivery is what we're going to cover.
Thank you. And last but not least, in terms of our guests on the podcast today, Caroline Keep from University of Central Lancashire. Could you do a quick brief introduction, please?
Yeah. Caroline Keep, AI scientist, researcher, currently looking to AI in education, autistic, ADHD and teacher. So all round techie and autistic ADHD.
Thank you. So let's kick off the conversation. And as I said in my brief introduction, neurodiversity is one of those very current, very live topics of conversation. But do we all really understand what we're actually talking about when we discuss this topic? So there are a number of different words out there. Some of us may be familiar with them. There's being on the spectrum, there's neurotypical, there's neurodiverse, and all those things. And each of our guests have introduced themselves to an element of what their perspectives are on this. But before we get into that definition of what neurodiversity is, I think we should also make the assumption, and I'll ask our panelists to confirm their view on this, that having a diverse workforce adds value to the major projects environment. So by having different types of thinking, different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ways of looking at life, we're actually adding value to our major projects experience. I'm going to come to you, Helen, first, from a WSP technical perspective. You've obviously spent a lot of your career working in the major projects environment, whereas Ant said he's come to it relatively recently. What's been your experience of the value of diverse styles and thinking in the major projects experience in your career? And then may I also ask you to just bring to that conversation what your experience of being on the neurodiverse spectrum is?
So As an ally to neurodiverse people, can you do one question at a time,
Sorry.
please?
Okay. There you go. There's most. That's spot on. You see, there you go.
Any conversations?
That's
I
the
forgot to
learning
say I'm
experience we go through.
ADHD.
There you go. That's
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
first learning point. Take one step at a
yeah,
time. So yeah, no, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for
So,
that.
delivery. I said I've been on project delivery because lots of the pharmaceutical projects are not what you would consider major projects. So it was a big infrastructure project during COVID that I came into sort of the MPA universe because lots of my projects that I delivered are not what you would consider major projects. It was because I was on this major project that it was directly because of that Rosalind Franklin project that I sought diagnosis of the ADHD, because I absolutely flew. We were working from home. I was not in an open plan office being distracted all day. I had energy because I didn't have to go to the office. I didn't have to get on a train at a certain time and, see lots of lights and noise. At this point, I didn't know why. And then because we had to design a ultra high throughput laboratory and nobody had done it before, all of my creativity and my ideas were just what was needed. And I was given the latitude and the headspace to be able to put those forward and realise that my ideas weren't the same as everybody else's. Now, when you don't know that you think differently and you compare yourself, you think everybody knows what you know plus what they know, not I know stuff that they don't know, or I can connect things that they don't know. Ant, you've got your hand up.
Yeah,
I was gonna wait for you to finish now to
Oh, right,
introduce me.
as you see,
But what I was going to say was I was going to follow up on your point about how you discovered it at that stage and how you had to have a change of scene. Back to Al's original question about do we agree that diverse teams or neurodiverse teams add value? I would say when the correct framework is in place to allow the neurodiversity people to flourish, yes, but actually for neurodiverse people, whilst they have to be part of that cog to help what they need, they're not necessarily the best people to set that framework. It's quite a lot of expertise and research has to go into understanding how to make the framework for neurodiverse people in the workplace. And when you get that right, as Helen was saying, you can get the environment where people really fly and not just add a little bit, really add a lot of value. And it's so the possibilities are so broad.
So without being too trite about it, that is recognising the value of diversity with inclusion. You need to have both elements there. You have to understand the environment and the value of those diverse perspectives, but also create the environment where each of those diverse perspectives is allowed to add value. Caroline, I know you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, I'd agree with Anne and Helen to some extent. There's something called the admin burden, which is basically the burden that's required on neurodivergent people to be able to access the accommodations that they need, and that is quite high. So if you work in kind of neurodiverse teams, and the concept of neurodiverse we'll probably get into in a minute, every team is neurodiverse. No brain is the normal brain, all teams are. Then really there's an expectation quite often for the neurodivergent person to be able to, inform or build the kind of systems that are required to help manage and negotiate that workplace. And that's been problematic. Quite often we've not got the ability or the energy, or we require other assistants to be able to do that. So it's really important, what Anne was saying about the frameworks do have to be built, but they can't be built solely by neurodivergent people. That's quite a big expectation.
Now, and there were two things you said there that I thought were really interesting. One was the use of the word burden, which I think is quite indicative, and I'll come back to that if I may. But also the comment I was going to pick up was you said to some extent we're all neurodivergent. This phrase that we're all on the spectrum to a greater or lesser degree.
So, two things that I'll pick up on you there before I climb the
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
First up, neurodiverse means is really what people mean of the neurodiverse movement or the neurodiverse paradigm. The neurodiverse movement is the idea that most of us have, to some degree, a different brain than other people. No brain is the same than any other brain, and that the diversity is there, kind of similar to biodiversity, in which Judy Singer alluded to, but has since been proven that Judy Singer did not come up with single-handedly, which is autistic community groups. If you go look at the work by Robert Clapman on the empire's normality for that. And then the idea of the neurodiversity paradigm, which is more kind of the neurodiversity rights movement, which is this idea that certain conditions shouldn't be recognised in the mythified model. Both of those are things that are neurodivergent. What tends to happen is people misalign neurodiversity movement or paradigm with actually neurodivergency. When neurodivergency is the idea that you are divergent to the sort of the societal norms as they're entitled. So I'd be multiply neurodivergent for if somebody has ADHD or autism or they have various conditions or whichever one, they'd be classed as neurodivergent. And neurodivergency is what people often refer to when they're talking about neurodiversity. Neurodiversity includes us all. Neurodivergency includes those of us who may have conditions that are maybe on, what you deem to, the spectrum. The spectrum is a bit problematic in its terminology because none of us like it. It alludes to the idea that they're better than the higher low functioning model or mild or more. But to be honest, it doesn't really encompass it. If you're thinking about that like autistics, then most autistics prefer autistics. So if you were to refer to me as autistic, then that's fine, or neurodivergent, then that's fine. If you were to take me on the spectrum, I'd be like, where exactly is the spectrum? It'd be confusing. I'd be like, well, where exactly does this rainbow live? I'm not sure. So there's a few issues there. The big one regarding terminology is neurodivergent versus neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is everybody. Neurodivergent is those who have conditions that will require more assistance than them.
No, and I really appreciate that, Caroline, because one of the first things that the thing I can do as the facilitator of this conversation is stick my foot in it and allow you to challenge me back on my own terminology and understanding, and I think that's a great place to start because. You mentioned that the spectrum. The spectrum implies a linear, run from one end to the other. Whereas, of course, what you've already described there, and we've heard from Helen and Ant, is this is such a multidimensional element. And I know from my own experience with my own daughter, who is also, let me get this right now, neurodivergent, in 2 dimensions. That it's far more complex than this simple line from one end to the other.
I think for that as well, it also garners this idea that it's complex. It's really personal. So I am autistic and ADHD. They interact in a completely different way. So fundamentally, I will be very different to, say, Helen, who has ADHD, or I may be very different to somebody who's just autistic. On top of that, it's you say you met one autistic person, you met one autistic person. That kind of applies to all those who are neurodivergent because how it turned out and how it looks in a person is so really it's really, really quite tricky sometimes. And if you say it's spectrum, it does lend to this idea even of a linear nature, and it really isn't. If you've ever seen me try and cook, you'd not think that I could code an AI. Trust me.
Now, you want to jump in on the back of that, but also after you've spoken, I'd like to ask Helen, in a minute, what you think of that perspective from someone who, as you mentioned, came to this kind of conclusion, this diagnosis later on in your career, and what you wanted to jump on the back of what Caroline said there.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Al, you don't feel too bad because I've just learned that I've been misunderstanding the definition of the word spectrum this entire time. I thought it was a spectrum collection of different characteristics and issues, and that was so not a linear spectrum at all, but a spectrum like a range of things. Yeah. And a combination of those problems, like a range is like sort of 2D, and then severity was in the vertical columns, and That was my understanding of it the entire time. So I've been getting this wrong, apparently.
It's far more multidimensional than we both gave it credit for. Thank you.
I butt in there, and I wouldn't worry too much, to be honest, because I think each of us do get to define it ourselves. But there are some really good kind of ways in which you can define it. But I think spectrum's the awkward one, because some of us are comfortable with it, some of us are not. So it's a bit of an awkward one, and at the moment a lot of the language is still in flux. So, you know, I think we're still trying to work it out just yet. But I think...
And there's one... Sorry, Caroline. There's one phraseology that I do want to come back and ask you all about as well, which is this idea of what some people talk about the superpower of neurodiversity, and that again is can be quite divisive in people's. So I'll come back to that if I may. But I think what that's really highlighted, that very short part of the conversation, is, you know, the three elements that I've spoken about before when it comes to being an ally is this idea of curiosity, humility and vulnerability, so that, you know, as someone who sits here with experience of neurodivergence in the family, but not necessarily myself, you know, I'm curious, but I'm also recognizing that most of us are not necessarily going to get this conversation right all the time. And I think that's really important to have that open conversation, and hopefully this podcast is building on that. Helen, you mentioned, you know, in your introduction that you sort of came to the sort of realization of your own, you know, specific neurodivergence later on in life. How did that kind of manifest itself in terms of that sort of, was it a blinding flash of light? Was it a welcome relief? Was it a recognition that some of the things had fallen into place in your previous, you know, working career up to that point? How did it sort of that come out, as it were, in terms of your own sort of understanding of it?
Which one of those questions would you like me to answer?
Sorry, I've done it again, haven't I? There you go. See, I'm applying my own rules to the conversation and being very neurotypical. So there you go. When you were formally diagnosed with ADHD, was it a relief, or was it was it a relief to find that out for yourself?
Yes. It made a whole load of stuff fall into place, made a lot of sense. I had, in the last sort of 10 years, I think, so when I swapped from being an engineer to being a project manager, and I project managed in a very different way to everybody else around me. So I did it through relationship and through communication, rather than ever being able to hit a timeline, because I'm completely time blind. But in a big project, going back to MPA, you have a big team and you've got somebody that can do that bit. So that's, I think, one of your original questions was around, you know, neurodivergency and in a major project team. I think that's one of the big things, is there is enough team members that you can actually choose people that have got the right skill sets. For me, I had started using the language, I think I'm wired differently, and the realization, the thing that really tipped me off for it being ADHD was the emotional dysregulation. I have always cried a lot. Now, this is not very, very palatable in the workplace. People would rather you swear at them than cry at them. But I cry when I'm happy, cry when I'm sad, cry when I'm frustrated. You know, I leak. Maybe not like sob. I leak if I have my body feels big emotion. It doesn't quite know what to do with it. It leaks out my tear ducts. And I have always explained that away, just saying, you know, because I'm surrounded by engineers, I have a low set point on my high level, level. So it leaks quickly. Don't judge me how you would be feeling if you were crying this much. Somebody that doesn't have this issue would have lost a relative or something, you know. Yeah. And so I'd found ways to explain it. I'm I think I'm one of the most resilient people I know because I just keep going. Don't worry that I'm crying. I'm okay. But I'll keep going. So yes, it was a relief. I then had to do the normal grief cycle. So when you realise the what ifs, I've been passed over for promotions. I had a promotion to the technical director role last year, but it took me a lot more to get through it. I had to have some coaching, and I had to, I had to write my own job description because I didn't fit any box that would normally work for that. It's a privilege, but it's also a burden, a more administrative burden, as Caroline said, sort of thing. I had to jump through more hoops to get there. So yeah. Did that answer one?
Yeah, no, it did. And I think I was going to sort of come back on the admin burden, and especially as you mentioned it yourself. Is that admin burden something that you see very much falling to you, or now to the wider organisation around you?
So I put in place things. I've happened upon accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
Before lockdown, I got myself a Remarkable 2 because my working memory is shocking and I write everything down, but then I could never find it in the books that I think. Whereas if I've got an e-ink, I can then search it and stuff. So whilst Remarkable 2 is good, other e-inks do exist.
Available. Yeah, other solutions are
and this one is an Onyx book, so and it interfaces with Microsoft. So I can now, I came up with these sort of solutions of how I could, Andy Murray, silent on this podcast, has just shown his e-ink.
Yeah, Andy's lurking in the background and keeping quiet, so we don't get to hear his voice yet again.
I found, when I had my, you can get through Access to Work, you can get some coaching, individual workplace strategies. We really, really struggled to find any ones that I hadn't already come up with myself naturally.
So you kind of built those up over your previously undiagnosed career. And there's a probably good opportunity to bridge that then, because you've talked about technology, you talked about accommodations and various other things. Going back to Ant first and then to Caroline, Ant, you very much, have worked through your whole life with this, experience being very, very visible to you and to others. And perhaps less visible in later life as you've become, moved away from your non-verbal phase, as you very openly talked about. Where is for you and perhaps for others the role of technology and accommodations in supporting you in sort of the things that you need?
So actually for me personally, it's the technology is going my way, right? So not having to go into the office every day. I mean, when I'm going into the office every day, I used to have to make excuses to take an hour out every 4 hours.
For those who are just listening to this podcast, Caroline has just given the most amazing thumbs up to Ant for that one. So sorry, Ant, to interrupt.
Yeah. So I mean, because if I don't have an hour break from speaking to people, if I have 4 hours speaking to people, then don't have a break, I fall off a cliff. I lose the ability to speak for periods of time. I forget how to open doors, etc. But actually, I think so. I'm the opposite of Helen as well. So trying to link two together. My natural state without my mask is like showing no emotion. And so I find I make people very uncomfortable. So wear a fault. I'm wearing my mask now whenever I'm interacting with people. And I actually think, I see it as my duty to meet like 90% of the way there. Because when I think about it, where I came from, well, no one could possibly have been expected to meet me where I started. So my journey's been very long. And because of that, I do not disagree because people can do different routes, but I think I'm a lot more proactive than many autistic people and other neurodiversity labels of people that I've met, where I'm trying to fit in more as much as possible. But it's become so easy now with technology because all of the problems that used to be there are so easy to mitigate, and it's no skin off anyone's nose. So it's not a problem for people to meet you halfway anymore. And so just every aspect of modern technology. I just feel like the whole world is going my way. Food can be delivered because supermarkets are the worst thing in the world. There's so much stimulation. Going to a supermarket requires about 3 to 4 hours of planning. Have to memorize the route, look at the floor so you're only looking up at the right section because you can't stop all that information coming in. So things like that, not just, all this use of technology, it's revolutionized my life completely.
Helen, you want to jump back in on that before I go to Caroline?
Well, for those of you that are allies, Ant just said something that you may not know about, and that's that we don't have good filters for input information, and this is one of the reasons we get tired, is because we take in everything. And that's what Ant was talking about, where he's like trying to limit what he's looking at on the shelf, or he's taking in everything.
Yeah, thank you. Caroline, you obviously really resonated with some of the things that Ant said there about the way that society has moved forward with technology as well. Is there anything you want to sort of either come in on or add to that?
I kind of sit in the middle of you two, which is a weird place to be. So I kind of agree with Anne that like some of the technologies have benefited, especially if you've got things that can deliver, or we can do online conversations that require less kind of you, because there is I have periods where I go non-verbal, it's quite hard. So you have this kind of experience where you can only do so much, you only have so much energy or so many spoons within the autistic world to be able to do things. So you have to really quantify that and plan it carefully. But also, the ADHD in me continuously forgets things on a regular basis, can't remember where she put anything, forgets to eat. So, that's a common one. So there's certain factors that you can do where it is important to have the kind of people support there. So, things like reminding me to have lunch whenever I was in leading teaching roles was key. Reminding me that, I don't need to be in the whole coding lane doing something, because I can get hyper-focus that can last forever, which is this ability to focus for hours on end.
Yes.
So there is quite it's a bit hit and miss there regarding what's benefited us and what kind of hasn't. But what I would say about all of this is it doesn't quite often, it misses out on, I'd say, one big factor, in that we do have different working styles. So, for example, Helen was talking about or taking in more information. The average autistic takes in about 40% more information than everybody else. So, you're taking it in vast quantities all the time. And actually, when you start the kind of work, normal people on average use their focus time. It's about 3 hours, they say. An average person who's neurotypical is using their time at work, 3 hours of focus per day. But I can do 15 hours with straight focus, like you've probably never seen, but I'll have to take maybe 5 days off afterwards to recover a bit. So what we don't take into account is that you'll miss that kind of focused activity. So yes, you're going to get incredible work out of maybe an autistic or ADHD, or ADHD, but the truth is that they may have to do incredible focused amounts of work, but they may need downtime after that. And what tends to seem to happen is you hire somebody in and you'll get them to do the work, and then they do this incredible work, and then you give them more work, and then more work, and then they burn out, and then they leave. Just what you've got to do is build in lower pressured work, or expect that the work may fluctuate differently than the standard person, because we will not work at 3 hours of focus per day. We might work, 10 hours where they're just absolutely dedicated to one thing. We're totally in it. All it is that we talk about is that thing, and we might get incredible work done. But then at the end of it, we just might need a bit of a break then, and to stay at home and have my meetings online. So, there's got to be a bit more accounting that our working style are different, I think.
Yeah, and I think just from my own personal experience, I mentioned my daughter is just finishing university. She has hyperfocus, and one of the things I've realised with her is that hyperfocus may also be, 2 till 5 in the morning when she's writing a dissertation, and that might be the time when that manifests itself, and then it's the next day, as you said, Caroline, it's a complete write-off. And it's just having that understanding and that flexibility, which kind of bridges into one of the topics we want to cover is, we want to lead into is, what can we do? as allies, as organisations, as teams, as colleagues of people with neurodivergent conditions. Again, I always hesitate to use that phrase because there's the challenges around some of that phraseology. So I'll let Ant come back in on what Caroline's just said, but then I'd like to move into what can we do? What can we do to understand and to support and to help? And what did you want to chip in on?
Oh, I've lost my train of thought now, but I can
Okay,
comment
no
on
worries.
that.
Sorry, I've spoken too long. So
I can remember.
Oh, there you go. Off you go.
Yeah,
Go for it.
It was a memory thing. I said it was going to say it's a couple. I wanted to ask Caroline a question and want to make a statement. The statement was, so like I have the exact opposite problem of Caroline. I have like visually eidetic memory, so basically perfect recall. So then people would assume that you have a really good memory. But I always describe it as it's like I've got a library, but no librarian's gone around and filed the books in the right place. But when I can find it, I can remember things. I can like read off the entire page of the book, but that's also exhausting. So yes. I was wondering if Caroline gets stuck because I made sure my watch, if I don't move for an hour, it vibrates because I don't get tired from hyperfocus, but I get so stuck that if I don't have a tactile vibration, I can go for like 24 hours. But at any point, I'm not like Al's daughter. It's any point, any time of day. I just focus and I can't stop.
Yeah, so I have a similar problem, but the problem with me, the ADHD will not let me remember to put the watch on.
Okay.
So I watch the watch. So I tend to have systems that are set up that are surrounded by people. So I people this out. So like if I'm in the office at university, I have academics who will people in and be like, did you eat lunch? Did you move, Caroline? Or if I'm at home, my husband will be like, here's lunch. Did you move today? Did you do this? So I tend to delegate out that kind of thing. And, when I was in teaching, this is great because we have bells. We all do the same thing at the same time. So it's really nice and convenient. When I was in engineering, similarly kind of situation, we had a system where we took lunch at the same time. We did things at the same time. So it becomes more problematic to me when it's systems that are where we don't have systems where we do the same thing at the same time. So in that case, I tend to delegate it out so that people remind me of it. Because the idea that I will remember my phone or watch, or I can be in the hole and I cannot hear anything. So you have to physically contact me.
Okay, thanks. Helen, you were nodding along to some of that. What's your perspective on how others can help and what systems and structures that might help with for you, particularly personally?
Body doubling, I think, it was something that I did naturally as a kid. I could never clean my room without a friend or a parent or something. They're not cleaning it with me. They're just in the room with me. I did a master's in industrial project management, and a friend who also turns out to be ADHD and didn't know it either, we ended up studying together. She was in a PhD. It's this body doubling thing, and back to Ant and Caroline's point about technology is with us. You can get body doubles online now. There's something called Flown, and you can set your intention at the top of the hour, and you do a hour's worth of work, and then you have to say what you've done.
Thank you.
So what I was saying about what can other people do. So obviously not everyone's a Caroline. Caroline's obviously very proactive about being able to delegate. She knows herself very well, but not every neurodivergent autistic person in your office is going to be like that. Or know necessarily what the answers are. So I've found the most effective in new workplaces I've seen is when there's somebody who just asks a very simple question. What bits are difficult? Not even looking for a solution, just for people to understand, is there anything which is particularly difficult for you? Sometimes, all the time, and can we try and work out when? Don't even think about the solution at the beginning, just, what's difficult?
So first step is awareness, is what you're saying, to have that open conversation about what understand each individual. Going back to Caroline's much earlier point, this is a multidimensional problem and challenge for neurodiverse people and their colleagues. So actually that first step of just getting that information out there and understanding and sharing that. Caroline, you wanted to chip back in as well. So.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, and that's how I deal with it, but it's not always how I deal with it. So it's the majority of my con for dealing. However, there's certain ones that really ADHD gives you a lot from in regards to things like Pomodoro timers. They're amazing. Set yourself a timer, remind yourself that you sit there 45 minutes. It also doesn't deal with the idea, and Helen will probably realise this, is the energy to do the thing in the first place. That requires some thought. And actually, we have a saying in our house: there's now and not now, and there's the now problems that are the things that you do, and the not now. So anything that's a now issue gets that. We just assume it's going to take 5 minutes. Now it never takes 5 minutes. The whole report can take an hour, but I have time blindness, so I have no concept that it took an hour. So for me, everything takes 5 minutes, and then once I start it, I don't feel so bad about it then when I've done it all. But if I'm looking at like a mountain of work and I convince myself that that's actually a mountain of work, I'll never get the impetus to be able to do it. It will feel too overwhelming for me all round. So there's certain tricks with timers and things you can do, and just preparing yourself so you can do the work as well. Especially if you're on your own. I've had a period at the moment where I've been on my own kind of doing my research stuff, so I've been required a bit more of me for that. And timers are really good. And the dividing things into now, not now, having systems in place where you can go, this will take me 5 minutes, and I'll just start it, that one sentence, and then when you're in it, you're on the go. Right?
Is that getting started moment, isn't it? Yeah. Helen, you wanted to comment on that?
There's a phenomenon, and I don't know what it's called, but if I've got a meeting in my diary at 2:30, nothing in the diary ahead of 2:30, I will really struggle to get anything initiated before that meeting.
You're referring to ADHD waiting time.
Yes.
How you get around that one is you delegate your meetings for in the morning.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. In terms of allyship, your colleagues can help you by
Structuring the day appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. Caroline mentioned the spoon theory. If anybody listening to this doesn't know that, Google it. It's a really good idea. It's about how we manage energy. So I don't think we've got time to go into that now.
I think this if we weren't careful. I'm looking at Andy in the corner to give me a nod when it's kind of getting time to wrap this up, because I think I always just give me a 5-minute warning. But I think one of the things I picked up from Caroline there was a little bit of a paradox. It's one of my favourite words at the moment. This idea that a number of you, I think Caroline and Anne particularly, talked about the joy that I saw in your faces when you talked about working at home in COVID, and that freedom from the team and the pressure and the information overload. Yet at the same time, Caroline, you just talked about having, and Helen as well, having the body double and the friend. So there's a little bit of paradox there, isn't there, in terms of how we can help you, and you yourselves can manage that sort of difference of two things at the same time.
I'd probably pick in there and say the following. I always feel like for ADHD autistics, it's like too much of a good thing is not good. Do you know what I mean? So too much time on your own is not good, but too much time around other people isn't good either. So there's always kind of a balance with us between how our ADHD and our autism is interacting, and that can vary from day to day. So sometimes I'm like, yes, I can do all the peopling. I'm pro peopling now, and I can do all the talking. And then other times I'm like, no, I am done with the peopling. I never want to speak to anybody now for like the next month. And I think I just literally said that to some of my team over at UCLAN. It's like, I've just done interviews non-stop for the research. I don't want to talk to anybody for like a month. But I'll probably get like 3 weeks in, I'll be like, I probably need to talk to people again. So it's a balance, really, that's got to be struck. Because the overwhelm can have quite dire consequences if I get into it. And that's the tricky part. You can't afford to let yourself get too overwhelmed, because the consequences can be quite severe.
Yeah, so I'm what I'm taking out for this and trying to move this to some sort of conclusion is, we talked earlier on about the multidimensional nature of this, and there's no kind of one size fits all. What we just talked about there for me is about the dynamic nature of this, and that fact that you will go from one perspective one day to a different perspective the next day. And again, I see this with my own daughter when I mention hyperfocus. The other thing is you can't predict or you can't direct that hyperfocus into a particular topic or a particular time. It happens or it doesn't happen. And so I can't go to my daughter and go, I need you to hyperfocus on this today because that'd be really good for you. She will or she won't. And there's no way of working that out. So it's a very dynamic situation. I think, listening to that as an ally, it's understanding, having those conversations as Ant talked about, understanding that information, not necessarily coming to it with solutions, because the last thing you probably want to hear is, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that, at the wrong time, but also having that recognition that this is a very dynamic, very complex environment that you as individuals are operating in, and therefore, what can we do to understand and share in that conversation with you. So I think as we sort of move to a conclusion, I just really want to give each of you the opportunities. Is there anything that you've really sort of had this burning desire to share with the rest of us and obviously with the listeners before we sort of wrap up? And I'm just, because on my screen, and he's the one that moved the first, I'm going to go to Ant first on that one and see if there's anything he want to just sort of share and add to the conversation we've had so far.
It's not really about the workplace, but we spoke about technology earlier on, and I wanted to say with autistic children, especially like non-verbal, the technology out there is so amazing. So these people who work with special needs kids, or I've forgotten what the modern term is, special educational needs.
Yeah.
So they're very caring and compassionate, but actually these AIs in countries like Nigeria and other places where they have low teacher numbers, the AIs can mimic the mannerisms and the stimies of the autistic kids so that they can actually interact better, and the progress is much faster. So for someone like me, AI is going to help these children get from where I started to where I ended up in a much shorter time frame, because it's adaptive to the individual. So that makes me so excited.
Yeah, thank you for that. Helen, is there anything you want to add in?
These were really helpful. So I bought a pack of neuro cards, and they're just flashcards with all the different neurodiverse traits. And they have been so helpful in conversations with my family, my friends, my colleagues. I think I'm on about the fourth or fifth pack because I keep giving them away and rebuying them. But it was some lady that uses it in her sessions. It talks about the different things. So alexithymia is something I didn't know I had, and this sort of comes back to that crying thing. Difficulty identifying and describing your own emotions, and then it has a discussion point about and in a positive way. It's not a negative thing. So I found them very, very helpful.
Thank you, and Andy, I'm sure we could probably put the link to those in the podcast description on the website when it goes up. Thank you. Caroline?
I think one of the biggest things that you can do to make it a better working environment or better practice for everybody is to learn to use some of the accessibility features and the basic things that you have. So things like, like this, we can do it by audio recording, we can do it by video, we can do it by text, we can do it by email, you can do it by communication devices. You don't always have to have like a face-to-face meeting for things. And there's plenty of tools like Immersive Reader and Microsoft of various accessibility tools. Just look up the platform you're using and go look up accessibility tools and see how they're used. It's probably, I think, I'd say one of the biggest steps you can do straight off the bat. And don't expect maybe communication to be quite as if you find it tricky quite often, it's actually just the neurodivergent person themselves. You've got to kind of make that bridge as well. It's not just us making it more accessible for you all the time. You've got to bridge the double empathy gap. If you've not heard of the double empathy problem, go look it up. So I think there is something to be said for trying to make a more pronounced effort to communicate in more neurodivergent friendly styles, let's say.
Yeah. No, and I certainly learned that on the conversation today with Helen, and for picking me up on asking multiple questions. So I think that's a really good opportunity to sort of finish off and conclude. And I'd just like to thank very much, Caroline Keeb, Ant Newman, and Helen Buckingham for coming on and sharing their experiences and giving us plenty to think about. And hopefully you'll enjoy listening to the podcast. If you've got any comments when you've listened to the podcast, we'd be delighted to hear them. And if anybody's got any experiences around being an ally or being in the neurodivergent space, any resources or tools that you've come across, please do share either on the MPA website or through the LinkedIn post that you'll see on the back of this podcast. So thank you very much for your time, and I've really enjoyed my own learning experience today as well. So thank you.